All right, so now we're going to start talking about the respiratory system of the cat. And we might break some of this up into different sections as we go through. So I've already opened up the thoracic cavity of the cat. I did that by making an incision down the midline of the ventral surface of the cat, and then I cut down the lateral sides, opening up the rib cage and also opening up this more neck area and removing some of the muscles that we've already learned about. So we'll go over the oral cavity in another video that you'll likely watch before this. But what I want to show in this is just some of these structures that are within the thoracic cavity and the neck region. So we can start all the way at the top here. We have the larynx, as we've seen before. And then once we get past the larynx, you start to see these more distinct ring-like structures. Now we are in the trachea of the animal. And we can see the different cartilages making up the trachea. Later, we're going to revisit this. We're going to start talking about some of the blood vessels that are within this area. And one thing in particular we will talk about is these white structures. These are going to be some of our nerves. So if we zoom in real quick, you can see some of those structures that I'm talking about. Here's the nerves, here's a blood vessel, here's the trachea. Okay? So let's zoom back out for a little bit. The next big thing that we're going to see, I'm going to scoot my cat down a little bit here, is in the center we have the heart. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. That heart is surrounded by a pericardial sac. Once again, we'll talk more about that when we talk about the circulatory system. And then on both sides of the heart, we see the different lobes of the lung. There are multiple lobes here, and each of those are really, they look deflated right now, but they are more of a sac-like structure on the live organism. If we were to fold one of these back, what we're going to see, and I've already started picking at this a little bit, is that this trachea, as it comes down towards this region here, is going to start to branch off into different sections. And let's zoom in on this. The first big branch that we would have would be our primary bronchi. Then the primary bronchi, which is all the way back here, will branch again. You see a branch here, here's a branch here. These are now the secondary bronchi. And as those go out, you'll even see that those start to branch into tertiary bronchi. And then at the very end of those would be bronchioles. And the bronchioles are then going to terminate into what's called the alveoli. And these are the actual sacs, the sites of diffusion for oxygen from the external environment into the internal environment of the lungs. In addition, you'll notice that there's some red capillaries going in here. Those are coming from the heart. And you'll also see that there's oxygen-rich blood going back to the heart. So that site of gas exchange all is going to occur there within the lungs, and in particular at the alveoli. The trachea itself continues to, as we go further down, branch into smaller and smaller sections, hence the primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi and the bronchioles, ultimately ending into the alveoli. One last thing while we're in here, if we did look on the bottom of the heart here, I might have to pick for it. Right here you can see there's a line. That's going to be the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve is going to go to the bottom here. You can see I have this muscle-like structure separating the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. This is the diaphragm, and the phrenic nerve is what's ultimately innervating the diaphragm. It's going to help contract and relax the diaphragm, and ultimately that's going to be what changes the volume of the thoracic cavity. And as the volume increases and decreases, it's changing the pressure gradient within the lungs, ultimately allowing for air to be sucked in and pushed out. Sucked in and pushed out. That's all being driven by a pressure gradient that's ultimately created by changes in volume. I'll go over that in just a little bit as well. And that should do it for the thoracic cavity. We looked at the lungs, the trachea, the different levels of the bronchi. You won't be able to see some of those smaller areas. But if we took a look at this model, you'll be able to see, here I have my trachea branching into my primary bronchi, secondary bronchi. Those secondary bronchi then branch again into my tertiary bronchi, and then ultimately I have bronchioles being the very last levels of branching. Those then go to the sac-like structures, the alveoli, and you can also see that we have blood vessels coming in and out to exchange that oxygen, rich and oxygen poor blood, to reoxygenate that blood.